Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Julia Harrison, and I'm Director of the Frost Centre for Canadian Studies and Indigenous Studies, and I would like to welcome you all here this evening to the first of the North at Trent 2012 lecture series. And before we begin tonight with both our speaker and some other remarks, I would like to call on President Stephen Franklin to make a few remarks and welcome us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, and welcome everyone. This is a great pleasure for me to introduce the series, and Julia will return to introduce our guest speaker for the evening. But I wanted to start with just a few remarks about the origin of the Roberta Bondar Fellowship. And what happened, I think, was in the 1980s, there was a federal grant that was provided. It was to what is now the Frost Centre for Canadian Studies and Indigenous Studies, and it was to create a focus on Northern Studies at Trent University. And over that subsequent decade, there were a number of lectures, and they were supported by these funds. Each one brought to Trent scholars and specialists in a range of academic fields with expertise on political, historical, social, cultural, and environmental issues in Northern Canada. The series itself was launched by Justice Thomas Berger, and he's well known for his role in the Northern history as the chair of the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline Inquiry in the 70s. And I was thinking today, as I noticed, that another pipeline inquiry has at least resulted in some controversy on the news today. I don't know if people have heard about the Keystone Pipeline, which was proposed for the movement of oil sands petroleum down, or bitumen down to a series of refineries in Oklahoma and Texas, that was delayed at least for another year while a new environmental assessment occurs. This series brought some of Canada's most impressive Aboriginal leaders from the north to Trent, and these included Matthew Kuhn-Cum, who is a Trent graduate and a former Assembly of First Nations chief, George Blondin, who is a respected Dene elder, politician and an author, and Governor General Award-winning author Joseph Boyden, and Mary Simon, who then later became Trent's Chancellor. In 2007, to encourage new scholars in the field, two faculty members, Peter Lafleur from Geography, Peter's here tonight, and John Wadlin from Canadian Studies, shifted the focus of this Northern initiative. And they created the Roberta Bondar Fellowship in Northern and Polar Studies, and recommended the establishment of a teaching and research award to bring to Trent for up to 2 years a new scholar whose research and teaching would focus on northern and polar regions. And the fellowship was named after Roberta Bondar, who was our chancellor, very popular, very generous chancellor at Trent, concluded her term just as I was arriving in 2008. But she has a very strong interest and commitment to Canada's north. And tonight we will welcome, Julia will provide the introduction of Elise Legat, who is our Roberta Bondar Fellow for the next 2 years. Before that introduction, I just would like to thank those who served on the Roberta Bondar Selection Committee, which included Dr. Gillian Balfour from our Sociology Department, Dr. Lynn Davis from our Indigenous Studies Department, and Jonathan Bordeaux from Cultural Studies, Stephen Balking from Environmental Resource Studies. The undergraduate department in Canadian Studies will be jointly hosting Elise, the third Roberta Bondar Fellow, over the course of the next 2 years, and she will teach undergraduate courses or one undergraduate course in Canadian Studies and be a resource for students and faculty at Trent with research interests in the north. And she will give 2 public lectures, and so I will now turn to Julia to formally introduce our guest and to begin our first of the 2 lecture series.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen and I are holding this microphone, and Elise will be wearing it because we are being webcast to the globe as we speak, so it's all very exciting. But thank you very much, Stephen. I want to begin by acknowledging our thanks to the Roberta Bondar Fellowship Fund, the undergraduate department in Canadian Studies, the School of Graduate Studies, and Trail College. And I particularly also want to thank Kathy Scholl, who is the administrative assistant in the Frost Centre, for all of her hard work and attention to making this evening and the entire North Lecture Series, which will unfold this term, I'm sure will come off smoothly entirely thanks to Kathy. Tonight's talk is part of that series, but then we'll also be hearing at the end of the talk about the Northern Studies Colloquium, which is a student initiative, which is an important part of focusing and privileging work that's going on at Trent on the North. But on behalf of the Frost Centre and the undergraduate program in Canadian Studies, who are hosting the third Roberta Bondar Fellow, I would like to welcome you all here this evening. Dr. Elise Leggett was the unanimous choice of the selection committee for the third Roberta Bondar Fellowship, and she's an anthropologist who approaches her work from the premise that history, place, and knowledge systems are central to understanding and about how we live our lives. They are key to understanding cultural and social processes, and particularly at the community level. Elise Leggett is committed to the principle that doing research that addresses community concerns will better inform academic and the sciences more broadly, and the theoretical understandings that they grapple with. In 2002, based on over 10 years' work, grounded in this philosophy with her work with the Tlicho, or formerly dog group communities, she began work on her doctorate. And in 2008, she received her PhD in anthropology from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland. Her thesis was titled "Walking the Land, Feeding the Fire, on Becoming and Being Knowledgeable Among the Tlicho Dene." She worked with Tim Ingold, and for those of you in the field of Northern Studies in the social sciences and anthropology will know of Tim's work, those of you in geography. And he also at Aberdeen has pulled together a very interesting and important collective of Northern scholars, which I think is a community that Trent should help think about emulating. Harvey Feit was, in fact, Elise's external examiner, which is important in this context because Harvey Feit spoke as part of one of the Northern Share Lecture Series, so yet another Trent connection. In her dissertation, Elise explored what it meant to say, as the elders did, quote, "To be knowledgeable is to be from the land." This work built on her MA in anthropology from the University of Calgary, which was on the political analysis of a Northern Canadian community, and she began her work with a BA in archaeology from the University of Calgary. As an independent scholar and consultant for nearly 20 years in the Northwest Territories, much of her work with the Tlicho community, she has worked on a wide range of projects. These include the development of traditional knowledge research and a monitoring in collaboration with the Tlicho community, which will be the substance of her talk tonight, documenting the rules and expectations governing behavior associated with caribou. She's worked on a project about place names and stories as indicators of biogeographical knowledge, and worked on a large project about the caribou, but particularly understanding caribou around what was then, back in the late 90s, the proposed Diavik diamond mine. She has taught in a range of institutions, the University of Aberdeen, Aurora College in the Northwest Territories, which at one time was teaching courses that, in fact, were accredited through Trent's Native Studies program. The University of Calgary, and she's taught anthropology courses there, as well as outreach courses on local reserve communities. And she's given a range of courses and seminars to various agencies in the government of the Northwest Territories. She has served as a cross-cultural advisor on the Mackenzie Valley Environmental Impact Review. She worked as a program and research director on traditional knowledge and heritage program with the Treaty 11 Council. She was the director of policy and planning in the culture and communications within the government of the Northwest Territories, and she even served as the acting assistant deputy minister of culture in the territories. She's presented at conferences and in various fora, including Trent when she visited us here a few years ago, at Calgary and Aberdeen, at various conferences in the U.S., as well as very much in the communities with whom she works in the North. Her thesis is coming out as a publication, as a book, called "Walking the Land, Feeding the Fire," with knowledge and stewardship among the Tlicho, and it will be published by the University of Arizona Press, and in the fall, her second talk will be based around that. She has a wide range of papers published, many of them jointly authored with the community researchers she has trained, and with other academics who have traveled to the North to draw on her knowledge of working with Indigenous communities in the Northwest Territories for over 20 years. As the Roberta Bondar Fellow, Dr. Leggett will be at Trail and Trent more broadly over the next 2 years. She will teach, as Stephen mentioned, a course in Canadian Studies, which she hopes to run as a field course in 2013. The fellowship will allow her to make connections with a range of students, both graduate and undergraduate, and faculty interested in field-based northern research. She will continue actively to work with the Tlicho communities throughout this time, as well as spending time in the archives at the Smithsonian and a place that I love to spend time as well in the Hudson's Bay Archives in Winnipeg. But the central focus of her work during the fellowship will be spent writing up for a wider audience at the direction of the elders she has worked with, much of the information she has collected with them over the last 2 decades. It is their desire to have this material known more widely. Elise Leggett has the privilege of fulfilling this request for them, and the Roberta Bondar Fellowship will provide her a space in a community to encourage her within this work. Please join me in welcoming her to Trent. Her inaugural talk tonight as part of the Roberta Bondar Fellowship is titled Tlicho Dene, Monitoring the Land.
Okay. Well, that sounded impressive. I'd like to know me. I did. Oh, can you all hear me? Because sometimes I have a tendency to speak softly. So if you, lots of stuff. That's okay? Okay. So thank you, President Franklin, and thank you, Professor Harrison. I would like to dedicate this talk this evening to Harry Mantla, and a Tlicho elder on our Regional Elders Committee with whom I've worked. Harry died suddenly of a heart attack the day before yesterday. Harry was a young elder, and he was a full-time trapper, hunter, fisher, who helped at the school because he was very dedicated to the young. Although I am sad to be missing his funeral, I am very happy to be here this evening. Just 1 second. I find the light so bright I can't read. I'm wondering if we could just, maybe we'll have to turn the lights off. Yeah, that might be better, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, a little bit. It was in my eyes, yeah. So, although I'm sad to be missing his funeral, which I am very much sad.
Fields with expertise on political, historical, social, cultural, and environmental issues in northern Canada. The series itself was launched by Justice Thomas Berger, and he's well known for his role in the northern history as the chair of the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline Inquiry in the 70s. And I was thinking today as I noticed that. Okay, so I mentioned 85.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
And I think was in the 1980s, there was a federal grant that was provided. It was to what is now the Frost Centre for Canadian Studies and Indigenous Studies, and it was to create a focus on Northern Studies at Trent University. And over that subsequent decade, there were a number of lectures, and they were supported by these funds. Each one brought to Trent scholars and specialists in a range of academic fields.
My name is Julia Harrison, and I'm director of the Frost Centre for Canadian Studies and Indigenous Studies, and I would like to welcome you all here this evening to the first of the North at Trent 2012 lecture series. And before we begin tonight with both our speaker and some other remarks, I would like to call on President Stephen Franklin to make a few remarks and welcome us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, and welcome, everyone. This is a great pleasure for me to introduce the series, and Julia will return to introduce our guest speaker for the evening. But I wanted to start with just a few remarks about the origin of the Roberta Bondar Fellowship. And what happened